American booty for sale in every nation. 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 Got little girls.
But today's topic deals with life and death scenarios. We're actually going to be trying to demystify AIDS. AIDS is like a huge thing that's been going on since, 70s, 80s, and in Africa it's just killing our people. I've been actually taking a look at some research over the last couple of weeks, and I just kind of want to have a discussion from everybody's points of view of what they feel about AIDS. Is it heterosexual, homosexual? Does it actually go out and search and get black people? Is it one of those, equal opportunity diseases? Or are there some variations to the actual virus or so-called virus? I'm going to be joined with our expert colleague, Keedy, here at LIB Radio. If you haven't listened to Keedy, or have you had a chance to take a look at his research, he's done a world amount of research. He has books very thick about this particular subject. How are you doing today, Keedy?
I want to say greetings to you, my brother Michael Norvell. I'm actually doing very, very good. I took a nap this afternoon. I've been on this workaholic thing all month long, and I took a nap, so I feel like a newborn baby again. You know what I'm saying?
How many hours did you get?
I slept, I think it was 2 hours, one of them good sleep where you disconnect from time. I don't even remember what time I laid down.
Yeah, I love those power naps.
Yeah, it is awesome. It's really awesome. So I feel fresh and I'm ready to go. The brain cells are definitely clicking.
Okay. So let's just jump right into it. You can give us a call here. 310-673-5423 is a local telephone number. Again, it's November 27th. It's almost 8:15 on the PM in Pacific Standard Time. So, Keedy, now if we take a look at some of the so-called American information on AIDS, I'm always hearing that black women are the highest ratio of new cases actually reported in the U.S.
Yes, there are, in my research, I've listed 9 particular reasons why we see black women are coming up as the highest number of new HIV infections in the United States. When it comes down to actual AIDS cases, things shift around. As you know, there is a distinction between what is called HIV infection and what is called full-blown AIDS. Full-blown AIDS is when one gets sick. HIV infection means you've tested positive on these antibody assays that are being publicized. One of the main reasons is that the number of tests administered within any given group is also an indicator of the number of people within that group who will be listed as positive.
I'm confused.
So if you have 5 different groups of people, let's say 6 group of people. Let's make it easier. 4 group of people. You have white men, white women. They're going to make them all heterosexual to make it easy, right? We have white men, white women, 2 different groups, right?
Correct.
Black men, black women, 2
Correct.
different groups. If you can convince 100% of the group of black women to take the HIV antibody test, and you can convince 20% of the white women to take the HIV antibody test, and if you say have an equal number of the women in both groups that you've isolated, the group that took the maximum number of tests will also have the maximum number of positive responses. Not necessarily because they're infected at a higher rate, because one of the things we've found out about the tests is that they can be expected to lend a very high degree of what is called false positives. Then when you go down the list of things that trigger false positives, you also find that many of those things that are known to trigger false positives on the HIV test are also factors which are biased towards the black women. So, like I say, there's 9 different reasons why I say that black women have the highest number of new diagnoses. One reason also is you have point of access testing, meaning whenever people have access to the medical care industry, or I should say the reverse, whenever the medical care industry has access to people, they will want to encourage certain tests. Well, when a woman uses a free clinic, a government-sponsored, a county clinic or something, a health clinic, or an STD clinic, they're mandatory that they take the HIV antibody test. So therefore, you will find in poorer populations, they have a greater likelihood of using public facilities, where it's mandatory that they take the HIV antibody assay, whereas wealthier women tend to use private facilities for medical access, and they're not required to take the test.
So I guess what I'm hearing by this information, you're just saying the number of tests, even though white women outpopulate black women by like what, say 5 to 1?
The ratio of African Americans, according to the U.S. Census in this country, would have whites about 4 to 1 over black women. 4 to 1, 5 to 1, around that ratio. Okay,
so the reason why more black women are actually being tested so-called positive versus white women, if we're going to use these particular classes, is because they're just taking more tests.
They're being singled out for testing, plus the tests themselves have this error rate. And among the many things that triggers the error are things that are biased towards black people, including black people's protein makeup is distinct from white people. You have, if you can recall studies that dealt with RH factor, and the fact that black people's RH factor is distinctly different from European people's RH factor, as Asian people, when you have geographically isolated groups around the planet.
Well, there's a lot of things about our body that's distinctive towards a Caucasian body.
Correct. And in the blood, this is called RH factor. Well, RH factor essentially goes down to protein distinctions, the way that the specific proteins are aligned. And again, the HIV antibody tests are functioning by measuring proteins.
Okay, so let me, you confuse me, you got too many words here, but let me just kind of break down a little bit.
So what we're saying is there's a testing bias.
Okay, but, you said there's some errors. Now, over time, these errors would be, modified and changed back to their correct, data.
You would think so. But after 20 years of the AIDS industry, HIV industry, the most heavily financed infectious disease project in American history, after 20 years, they still have never produced an accurate measure for testing for HIV.
Well, there's a lot of things that I've been doing research over the years. I've been doing research for the last couple of weeks, but there's a lot of things I discovered about this disease for the years. Like, for instance, it was just more recently, in the last 5 years, that if you tested positive for AIDS, that you didn't have to disclose your sexual partners. And that was unlike any other type of sexual transmitted disease. Like if you got, let's say somebody contracted gonorrhea or something in that nature, and they went to the doctor and got some type of penicillin or whatever the drug or antibody might be, they would be required to hand over their, latest sexual partners so, the health people can contact them. Well, due to privacy reasons, that for AIDS took a long time to come about compared to some other sexually transmitted disease.
Yeah, well, AIDS has always, from the very beginning, posed more as a political disease than a truly infectious disease outcome. The way that the bias was being pushed away from the original high-risk groups to push it out into the mainstream public was something that a lot of epidemiologists complained about, because they said all the numbers were indicative that AIDS, this disease, so-called caused by the AIDS virus or HIV, was really only affecting narrow groups. And as early as 1993, even the Wall Street Journal came out with articles talking about the hype that the CDC was putting out, hyping up the risk to heterosexuals from HIV infection, despite the fact that the numbers were never there. And they thought that they were wasting the resources necessary to combat this infectious disease by spending so much time hyping up the risk to heterosexuals, when in reality all the numbers were very clear, and they stayed very consistent for the first 10 years, that it was only the original risk groups, homosexuals, in fact specifically it was male receptive homosexuals, intravenous drug users, users of blood products, as well as children born to IDUs or intravenous drug users and users of blood products. It was fixed. Those were the original risk groups. And it was only after 1993 when the CDC reclassified what constituted AIDS and started adding a bunch of other diseases such as cervical cancer and a couple of other infectious diseases that they were able to push it then. Yeast infection was added. They were able then to push it out of its original risk groups. And in 1993, you saw this big jump in AIDS cases. And that was the only time you ever really saw a statistical increase in the number of AIDS cases. Despite all the hype, AIDS has been declining since the beginning. Okay, well, let's get into some, origin of the disease. As I start to look at this research and take a look at the, first, when we hear about the primate monkey out of Africa and how the disease was originated in Africa, and we hear all this kind of jargon and, I call it propaganda, but, The first story was the green monkey.
Yeah. Now it went to chimpanzees and all these other different stories that deals with the animal, coming into the human population in some form or fashion. Well, and it all started in Africa. Well,
so they say.
Okay, well, that story's been going over and over again. Okay, now, there's another theory. And I'd like to share it with you. Well, I was looking at this special virus cancer program that was on
Boyd Graves. he invented the term special virus program.
Yeah, and see, when you mention how they incorporated a lot of cancers into AIDS, they were talking about back then how there was an AIDS and cancer, meaning that there was some similarities between some cancer particular diseases and AIDS, and how they were mentioning that there were AIDS and cancer. Anyways.
Well, there are 5 of the 30 different CDC classifications for full-blown AIDS. You see, AIDS is not a disease. AIDS is a complex of symptoms. And the CDC has classified 30 different diseases that, along with an HIV antibody positive status, give you full-blown AIDS. Of those 30 diseases, 5 of them are cancers.
Yeah. That's deep. So the Special Virus Cancer Program, SVCP, which was from 1962 to 1977, was actually using a lot of the cancer research and to try to combat cancer and to create some type of vaccine and some other type of things you can do to cure cancer. And so over the years, they kind of came up with this, they were actually experimenting with a lot of monkeys, a lot of chimpanzees.
That's how they do lab experiments.
Yeah, and they were really trying to find out how they can, make the AIDS or the cancer inside these monkeys so hopefully they can cure people. And so one of the things that this report that I actually got said that, we take a look at this so-called primate theory, but we never really go into the so-called designer virus idea.
Right.
How it was created in the lab.
I began my research from that position in 1987 when I first encountered this dialogue that AIDS was created, or HIV or whatever, HTLV3. It had 9 name changes. It was created in the laboratory. And I was absolutely convinced that was true because I had a background in medical research or biological research, and my father was a chemist. I felt that I could read these documents, and so I purchased a big stack of documents from Sears Miles, who was really considered to be kind of the primary researcher from that angle in the black community. And I took these documents into major libraries, UCLA, USC, LA County Library. I spent a lot of time at Cal State University Limited Library, medical research libraries, looking for these references that were in the stack of documents that I had. By 1993, I started calling Sears, and I said, Sears, I'm getting all these contradictions in this stuff that just doesn't fit. There's inconsistencies, there's leaps of logic, and there's also outright misreading of what these documents actually say. So by 1993, I reversed my position. And since 1993, I have held fast to the fact that this is a phony construct, an instance, a hoax. But when we look at this so-called Special Virus Research Program, and I was tickled to see that even now it has initials, sounding as if this were an actual government program. That's just not true. In fact, if one were to go out and Google or do your search engine for the phrase and put it in quotes, which puts all the words together, Special Virus Research Program,
Cancer program?
Special cancer virus research. Give the specific, because this is what I want people
Special virus cancer program.
Okay. Special virus cancer program. Put that in quotation marks and search for that on the internet. Virtually all of the references will come up to one man by the name of Boyd Graves. He's an African American man. And if a person were to research the following phrase, oncovirus research program, you will find hundreds, if not thousands, of references come up of actual official government-sponsored research. Now, the documents that Boyd Graves purports are this special virus cancer program are the same ones that come under the official government research program, the oncovirus research program. Oncovirus, basically oncology, the study of cancer. That was a failed program to search for a virus, an infectious agent, is the cause of cancer. Mm-hmm. Now, in my book, High Crimes of Murder, I actually have a chapter called The CIA and Reggae, where in exploring the question, was Bob Marley killed by a induced cancer, I went down and I researched this particular corridor. And so I do go deep into the oncovirus research program, and to even the claim by two groups of scientists in 1971 who made the claim that they were able to induce cancer with a virus in lab rats in 1971. I think one group was from Ohio State University and the other group was in the Air Force. And one of my good associates, friends, Harvey Bialy, a world-renowned molecular biologist, I asked him about the oncovirus research program because he was a part of it. He was actually paid by it. And he said it was a dead-end street, and that's why the whole thing just quietly faded away. And so I contend to this date that the oncovirus research program was an official government research program. It came after the shutdown of the biological warfare program, and many of these scientists were looking for something to do. Well, Nixon says, well, let's have a war on cancer. And so many of these people who were retrovirologists, which was the hot scientific inquiry at the time, again, if you go back 100 years, it was looking for bloodletting, or a couple 100 years bloodletting, and then they discovered the bacteria, and there was this battle between Pasteur and Lister whether viruses cause disease or bacteria cause disease, or whether disease enhanced bacterial growth, etc. There was that debate between these two camps, Beauchamp and Pasteur. And then every phase of technology brings in a new phase of these researchers. Then after the bacteriologists were the viruses, because they could find microscopes, they could find smaller and smaller things. Then after the virus guys were prominent, then came the retrovirologists, who were looking for reverse transcriptase, evidence that viruses would inject DNA into the host rather than just the opposite. And now the latest thing is the DNA people, the gene researchers, etc. This is all really more a consequence of technology developing than it is a consequence of these people really understanding health, biology, immune system, etc.
Okay, so now, what is the relationship between the so-called hepatitis B vaccine and the population that inserted into, the gay population in New York and the gay population in San Francisco? It's
chronology, time consequence. It happens with a whole consequence of things. Remember was it the Stonewall Rebellion, where gays really kind of came out of the closet? That happened in New York. I think it was Stonewall in New York. That was 1971. Here we have Nixon's war on cancer. Right around the same time, 1969, 1971. Here we have the emergence of retrovirologists, 1971. Here we have the hepatitis B vaccine campaign, about the same time, 1971. Here we have also the smallpox eradication program, begins around 1976, but it goes through, I think, the mid-1970s. So all of this, much of this, is just mere coincidence. The thing about the hepatitis B vaccine that is so important was the behaviors that the male, homosexual, queer, gay, however you want to term population, was engaging in. If you take a specific look at this population, at that time period, remember that was the free sex, free love, and drug era too, where people were like really breaking out. One of the drugs that was being used there was called poppers. Do you remember the amyl and butyl nitrates? They call them poppers. You see them advertising in like the cheap magazines or little girly magazines.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was.
They called it rush, where you sniff them and you had a rush. And that was big part of the disco scene also. Well, these poppers were related to the outbreak of AIDS, very directly related, because amongst the earliest males was this cluster. In fact, the very beginning of AIDS is related to these poppers, this cluster of 5 male homosexuals who presented over at UCLA in Michael Gottlieb's laboratory, who presented with this unusual skin cancer called Kaposi's sarcoma, which is considered to be one of the indicator diseases of AIDS. Well, Kaposi's sarcoma, a rare skin cancer, also is an end consequence of using these amyl and butyl nitrates, which cause the capillaries and blood vessels to dilate, causing this rush, which also they were using because it caused sustained erection and also loosened or relaxed their anal sphincter muscles. And so this substance, amyl and butyl nitrates, became very popular within this crowd right at the same time. So what is the significance of smallpox eradication and the hepatitis B vaccine campaigns? The significance is coincidence, and also when they did the hepatitis B vaccine campaign in New York and a couple of other cities, they specifically went after homosexual men because these men were presenting the highest incidence of what is called hepatitis B.
Well, what I've read, though, as far as like 20% of the men who had received that hepatitis B vaccine within a year or two had, contracted AIDS. And then 6 years later, 80% of those people had contracted AIDS. And so this association between this vaccine that was given to, the gay population.
High risk gay population.
Okay.
It was given to a high risk gay population. Because the low risk homosexuals, those who were in monogamous relationships, those who did not engage in receptive anal intercourse, they were excluded from this whole AIDS demographic, this epidemic.
Right.
And so that's very significant that they were excluded. It is a behavioral disease.
Well, no, that's basically the idea that was coming out in the early 80s, is that, these promiscuous men were causing the disease upon themselves.
With a specific set of behaviors that they were engaging in frequently.
Correct. So now we look back and we see how, America's so-called introduction to AIDS and the hysteria that went into, not only receiving the disease, but the fact that you were gay and that you were causing this upon yourself.
Or Haitian.
Yeah. Haitian and Sub-Africa.
Right.
In Africa as well.
Sub-Saharan Africa, they call it.
Right.
Now, the Haitians make a great point of analysis, because we recall all the things they said about the Haitians and the Ugandans in the earliest days of AIDS. The Haitians were considered to be the model of heterosexual HIV infection. Am I correct? Do you recall those days?
No, I don't.
Okay, yeah. Because I began my study and kept the documents, it's real easy in the early stage. Basically, they wouldn't let Haitians in the country. The Haitians were absolute pariahs.
Of course. I remember those days. Yeah.
The epicenter of... And they actually made predictions in the late 1980s. And by 1989, they said at the current rate of infection, when they said AIDS cases were doubling every 26 months, they said that somewhere between 1991 and 1996, they had expected the entire childbearing age population of Haiti to be wiped out by AIDS.
Has that happened yet?
Well, here we are now, some 10 to 15 years later. Which country, according to the CDC's World Fact Book, has the second highest fertility rate in the Western Hemisphere?
I don't know.
Haiti, after Guatemala. So, if their childbearing age population was wiped out, how can they still be producing so many babies on the island? Maybe they had a big, huge immigration of people into Haiti to replace the childbearing age population? No, that didn't occur. Similarly with Uganda. It was claimed that Uganda was where AIDS began. Y'all Africans up in them bushes with them monkeys was doing something. They said you was either eating them or engaging in receptive anal intercourse with monkeys. That was actually, they were putting this crap out there, And so they even traced down one particular district in Uganda. I can't remember the name right now, but I keep all these files handy. I have tens of thousands of pages on this stuff. And the thing about it is now, after 20 plus years, from 1979 to today, maybe 25 years or 30 or close to 30 years of this, you go back to that same district in Uganda, said the beginning of AIDS, and where they predicted that the infection rate in that district was between a low of 16% as maybe as high as 24% of the adult population infected with HIV. Now they say that that population has a 5% infection rate, and in the subsequent years, the population in that district grew at 3% annually, one of the absolute highest population growth rates on the entire planet. So how did they move from a 16 to 24% infection rate down to 5%? And why did the population grow at the highest rate on the planet while they were infected with a killer STD?
Maybe over generations, they migrated, they learned to battle disease, right?
People generally migrate away from disease-ridden areas, not into it.
I'm just throwing some hypotheses. I don't know.
In fact, what it was is it never was in the first place. What they did in that 20 years is they recovered from a civil war, a brutal civil war. They rebuilt the roads, food delivery systems. They put in water sanitation systems. They put in sewage systems. And they also built rural clinics where children and adults and vulnerable populations who had been dying from malaria and tuberculosis and Shigella and other waterborne parasitic diseases, where they could get primary care treatment. And guess what? The AIDS deaths dropped precipitously when the people were able to get access to clean water, sanitation, good food, and medical care.
So what does all that particular facts or non-facts and propaganda information, tell you?
It tells us that AIDS, as believed to be a sexually transmitted infectious epidemic, is a hoax. It's a fraud. It's a phony.
Really?
Yeah, and I've been saying this for since 1993, I've very firmly said, and I've written 3 books, the second of which is called AIDS Exposed.
I mean, but that's kind of hard to say when
huge numbers of people are dying?
Yeah.
Which country are they dying in often?
Well, in Africa, they say.
But Africa is 53 countries.
Well, but we're talking about,
Okay. Can I just read you a little bit from my book? Have we got time for that?
Hey, I'm just looking at some of the facts that I went up and, searched.
Yeah.
Okay, while you're looking, I also read that there's a gay and straight strands of the HIV.
They call it HIV-1 and HIV-2 because the epidemiology never fit anything predictable as an epidemic, as an infectious disease. They started coming up with these different stories. They say, well, the reason it's different in Africans and it behaves so differently in Africans is because they have HIV-2 and they have HIV-1 over here. And it's just absolutely preposterous. And at one point, this guy, Robert Strecker, who put out the so-called Strecker Memorandum, said that they were 9,000 to the 2 to the 9,000th power different HIV strains or something. These people just been able to, they just kind of been able to wing it, I think it's
so all those people are not dying in Africa. And then, did you look on the cover of LA Times today? Los Angeles Times newspaper?
Yeah, we talk about the AIDS orphan baby.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that real?
It really tugs at your sentiments, doesn't it?
Oh, of course it does.
Well,
the little orphan child by himself on the cover of the page.
Boy. Isn't that the same baby whose picture we saw a few years ago sitting in the dust with a big distended belly and the vulture sitting in the background waiting to pick his bone?
Okay, now how can you make fun and, joke over life and death here?
How about what Stevie Wonder said? When you believe in things that you don't understand, then you suffer from superstition. Can we be amused at people who are so driven by superstition that they think what is not real is real and what is real is not real?
So there is no disease that is sexually transmitted. It's killing people.
STDs generally aren't killers. Very rarely do you ever see STDs are killers.
Okay, so the whole thing about HIV being sexually transmitted and people are dying. They're not dying from what we're saying they're dying of.
For one, there's really never been anyone who proved HIV exists.
All those,
Let me ask you a question.
All those alphabets in front of their names and this consensus. I mean, hey, I'm a huge conspiracy theorist myself, but it is kind of hard to believe that you get a whole group of people, basically agreeing, and they're so-called the experts, and nobody checks their work.
Well, you say nobody checks their works, and how come there are 600 major scientists, including 5 Nobel Prize winners I cite in my book, who have questioned this since the very beginning? The world's leading retrovirologist a man on course to get his Nobel Prize, was thrown out of the thing for saying all along, this is absurd. Can I quote from him? Dr. Peter Duesberg. You probably heard his name before.
Please, let me hear him.
Dr. Peter Duesberg, retrovirologist, member of the National Academy of Sciences, says, quote, HIV is just a latent and perfectly harmless retrovirus that most, but not all, AIDS patients happen to carry. To say that HIV is the cause of AIDS is to cast aside everything we know about retroviruses. The HIV theory is inconsistent, paradoxical, and absurd. Now, Walter Gilbert, a British professor of molecular biology at Harvard, not British, he's at Harvard University. He won his Nobel Prize for chemistry in 1980. He said this about Duesberg. He said, Duesberg is absolutely correct in saying no one has proven that AIDS is caused by the AIDS virus. And it is absolutely correct that the virus cultured in the laboratory may not be the cause of AIDS. I would not be surprised if there were another cause of AIDS and that HIV is not involved. And I cite 5 Nobel Prize winners.
Okay, so now let's get to some basically facts, fiction,
Facts or fiction. That's a good one. Facts or fiction.
So
Oh, incredible. It's one of my favorite awards. I've been coming for so many years just to really salute good athlete talent and work things out. I love it.
Hey, man, come over here, check this out, man. Check this out.
What's that, man?
You want to see this, man? Check it out, man. No, this angle, man, right here. Trust me.
I think
What
they
do you
go
think of
hand
that,
in hand. I think that, especially women athletes.
I got a fantasy here, Dad.
I might
Sexy,
pray.
so to speak, to brand
right after the
themselves
show.
and get positive things.
Bathroom.
Definitely, it's a marketability.
Man.
You think that's real? You gonna go for that?
Incredible. I've been eyeing that issue
I'm
for so
trying.
many years since it started, and I think it's awesome.
Man, but she used to run track, so I know her booty's real. Man, where is my phone, man? I need my phone right now.
I'll be doing my foundation
got
work with
mine.
Take Flight for Life.
pull this
My
up.
Twitter is @Monica.
I'm gonna look away, man, so you can get it right now. Get it right now.
Damn, yeah, that's it, right, Jay?
Man, make sure you send me a copy.
I'm gonna send you a copy right after I examine this myself.
now let's get to some basically facts, fiction.
Facts or fiction. That's a good one. Fact or fiction.
So there is something that people are dying of.
Oh, there's a whole spectrum of things that people die of.
Okay, and they've called it and categorized it and grouped these particular conditions as AIDS.
Well, people die of a whole bunch of things, Michael.
I understand. I
can find you car accident victims whose
okay,
deaths
let's
have been
stick to
called
the
AIDS.
subject. Let's stick to the subject.
Well, you asked a question. I'm responding to it directly.
Okay, again, but we're not talking about all the various things, like I can breathe too much and I can die. Okay, let's
That's
talk.
not what I'm talking about either.
I'm talking about the fact that there's a category of so-called symptoms in which people are having, and they're categorizing this as AIDS.
In the United States, there are 30 of those. If you go to Canada or Australia or Britain or France or Germany, those diseases classified as full-blown AIDS will change. Name one other disease where its symptoms, manifestation, and its outcome changes when you cross borders.
Oh, I don't know I don't know of one.
This is a political disease.
Okay, so now you're saying that something is happening to these people, but it's not something that is directly related to HIV or any type of sexually transmitted disease.
I couldn't say that because
but you keep saying it's a hoax. So I'm trying to understand what is the hoax and
Michael,
what is real.
But when you put in these qualifiers, listen. See, when you say that's not related to HIV or any other sexually transmitted disease, if you had left that second qualifier out, I could have answered this straight. But when you said any other sexually transmitted disease, then gonorrhea and syphilis and trichomoniasis and perhaps chlamydia come into play.
Okay, but
and these
particular diseases,
they trigger severe immune responses, correct?
I'm not a doctor.
Just think about it.
I mean, it makes sense to me, but
yeah, just think about it.
I'm trying
to
understand.
Use logic at a certain point here.
I'm trying to understand your theory here. So you're saying that
if they trigger severe immune reactions and responses, then they are related to an acquired immune deficiency, I say disorder, syndrome.
Okay.
AIDS stands for acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Those of us in the know would prefer to use the word disorder other than deficiency.
Okay.
Will syphilis trigger a severe immune response? Absolutely, yes.
If left untreated.
Well, even if treated, it's treated by triggering an immune response.
Okay.
Right. So, again, when you put that qualifier in there, because I have to listen to you with precision, I can't respond to something that has these qualifiers in it the same kind of way. And that's why my response was what it is. I'm not ducking the question. I just have to respond to this with precise language.
Okay. So breaking it down to, you're saying that HIV does not cause AIDS. Is that correct?
There is no evidence that HIV is the cause of the disease known in the United States, or the set of diseases known as AIDS. There's no proof of that.
So what is happening to those people in Africa where now something is happening in which, you know, the World Bank, Export and Import Bank, announces it's going to lend Africa $1 billion to finance the purchase of American AIDS drugs and medical services? I mean, something is going on there that requires somebody to borrow $1 billion and puts it on the debt of the country.
Well, where are they going to do? What else are they going to do with these drugs? Where are they going to?
I understand the capitalism motivation of greed. No doubt about it. But how do you convince a whole country to buy into it? A whole continent, a whole country to buy into the idea so much that they'll borrow $1 billion.
You don't have to convince the whole continent to do it. All you have to convince is a narrow set of leaders in those particular countries to agree to that.
Okay, so who?
And when those narrow set of agreeers agree to that, is there a likelihood? Is there any evidence of we seeing that narrow set of leaders lining their own pocket during the process?
I don't doubt it, but these people are dying.
People die. Listen to this statement. Listen to the statement, Michael. Listen to the statement. I know you're so skeptical, but I've been doing this since 1987.
It's not skeptical. This conversation just went beyond where I thought it would go.
You said people are dying.
And you keep, people are dying.
Where, in Kansas?
No, in Africa.
So there's no one dying in Kansas.
There's people dying everywhere.
So your statement, people are dying, is meaningless.
But you know what I mean. It appears that people are dying at extraordinary rates behind a common disease.
It appears so.
It appears.
But the evidence is not there.
But what are these people dying of?
Can I quote from
what
are
they dying of?
Can I quote from the Lancet magazine from Dr. Felix Konote Ahulu,
a
world-renowned researcher will tell you. Can I answer your question?
Answer it, please.
Dr. Felix, ID Konote, Konotey -Ahulu, as it was published in the prestigious British medical journal The Lancet, to make my final argument for an African AIDS hoax. Quoting from him, before the days of AIDS in Ghana, there was a death a day, more in the rainy and Harmattan seasons, on my ward alone of 34 beds. They died from one or other of the following. I'm going to read this. It's only one paragraph. I'm going to read it exactly as he wrote it. Cerebrovascular accident from malignant hypertension, stroke. Hepatoma, ruptured amoebic abscess, hematomasis, chronic renal failure, sickle cell crises, septicemia, perforated typhoid gut, hepatic coma, hemoptysis from tuberculosis, brain tumor, Hodgkin's disease, cardiac tamponade from endomyocardial fibrosis-related pericardial effusion, acute myoblastic leukemia, status asthmaticus, pyogenic meningitis, left ventricle heart failure, and misdiagnosed ectopic pregnancy. Today, because of AIDS, it seems that Africans are not allowed to die from these conditions any longer. If tens of thousands are dying from AIDS and Africans do not cremate their dead, where are the graves? You know, Rowan Milan, a South African journalist who so despised Thabo Mbeki because his stance in rejecting those pharmaceutical companies and their chemicals, he said he went out to prove Thabo Mbeki was an idiot and that South Africa was being wiped out by AIDS. So he took a 2-year trek to the country, 1-year trek to the country, financed by Rolling Stone magazine, who published an article on it in November 1998. And he was looking for all these dead people. After 1 year, he came back and he said he could not find the dead people. He even went to casket manufacturers. He went to one set of casket manufacturers. They said, well, we make expensive caskets. We don't service those poor people, those shanty people. So he went to the guy who did service the shanty people. And the guy's warehouse was stuffed full of caskets because he had made all these caskets anticipating all these AIDS deaths, and he wasn't selling them. So where are the dead people? Which country can these dead people be found in? They said Uganda, just the opposite. There was a story in the Spectator that said that Botswana may be the first country to see its population negatively impacted by the AIDS crisis.
Yeah, I read that too.
They said that Botswana's population of 1.4 million had declined to 1 million because of AIDS.
Okay.
Botswana government released its census 30 days later, and the same magazine, The Spectator, covered the census. Botswana's census said that their population had grown to 1.7 million, and instead of a declining population, they had actually seen a 3% population boom in Botswana. So it's not happening in Botswana. It's not happening in South Africa. It's not happening in Uganda. It's not happening in Zimbabwe, Zambia, or these other countries, all said to have one point or another been the epicenter of AIDS in Africa. So, Michael, I have to ask you, which country is it happening in?
Hey, by all the reports that I'm reading, and somebody borrowed some money for some reason, sounds like there's something going on to me.
But I have to ask you which country it is. You have
Africa and South America?
53 countries.
You know, Brazil?
So it is. So we can see this is where it's happening in Brazil.
Do we have a caller?
I think that caller didn't come through, but they're going to call right back. If you say it's happening in Brazil, that gives me a point to go, and I can just check facts for just real quick.
Okay,
I don't see it happening in Brazil
Let's
either.
just slow down the conversation. Now, you know, the people who are listening, they're probably listening to this and just kind of like scratching their heads just like I am.
Well, most of our audience, you know, I have the world's largest collection of these dialogues on AIDS.
Okay.
So most of our audience is actually pretty well familiar with it.
Okay, well, let's just take it for the novice who's not familiar with you.
That's correct.
Who might be hearing you and going, what is this man talking about? You know, I mean, when I hear that they basically reclassified other diseases, and now that all these new classifications have now gone into the whole idea of AIDS, and that they're having a heavy testing, you know, I'm just kind of speechless.
Yeah. Well, welcome to the world. Do you want to take this caller? Maybe this caller might be able to help either one or both of us call.
Hi, could you tell me what's your name and where you're calling from?
Yes, I'm Barrett calling from RSRC.
How you doing?
Good.
All right, and I'm sorry, once again, your name, please. I didn't have the right button pushed.
Mumbera from All-Star City.
All-Star City?
All-Star, that's
All-Star
Atlanta.
City.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Haven't been to Atlanta very often. So, do you have any questions or comments?
No, well, yeah, actually, I've got a couple of comments. How long have you been broadcasting your show, Michael?
20 weeks.
20 weeks, okay. I'm kind of confused because if you listen to LIB radio at all, especially in the last 20 weeks, I'm sure Keedy has had, several shows on what he's talking about now. So I'm not sure I mean, do you listen to LIB outside of
Yeah, I listen to
your own
LIB.
show?
I mean, one of the things I'm doing, I'm just trying to take it, some of the things that are listening by my audience is a wider group than LIB. And so I'm just taking it from their point of view, listening to this information for the first time. And so I'm like, hey, prove it to me. I mean, I'm a 2-year-old. Help me understand your point of view.
Okay.
So as I'm talking to Keedy here, hey, I'm just challenging them.
Uh-huh.
I mean, there's some things that are a little bit like, okay, but, overall, the overall facts or, points of view, it doesn't really surprise me. But at the same time, I'm just trying to, again, most of the people who are going to hear this who are outside of LIB radio are just going to be amazed by what Keedy is saying. Don't you think?
Well, yeah, outside of LIB, but like I said, you've been on for, what's that?
20 weeks, over 20 weeks.
3, 4, yeah. So, it's just kind of confusing that you have all the surprise on this about the situation when, he's had a bunch of programming on this topic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I can understand how, people are surprised, Monberry. You yourself have done this research for a number of years, and it seems rather, blatantly obvious to us at a certain point. But, yeah. Michael, really, we have to acknowledge, Michael reflects the overwhelming majority of our people who have come to believe that what the government agencies and private research agencies and even black leadership, political leadership, has been delivering them, and that to be true.
And so I'm like, prove it to me beyond like a reasonable doubt, like I'm a 2-year-old.
Well, I can't do it to a 2-year-old cannot talk to you that way. Okay,
but the point what I'm trying to say is, all these things that are taking place, I want to be able to give the audience something, who is outside the LIB audience, something they can go, okay, where can I get and correspond some of these facts you can talk about so I can do my own research, so I can be led in the right direction. That's all I'm trying to do with asking you these questions here, to kind of nail you down, so to speak.
Right. And, maybe this format is not one where giving references the best. I did give the reference to Dr. Felix Konoteahulu, and I highly recommend, because he's written a book exposing this whole fraud. I could take you back to my library. I have a whole bookshelf. Gary Knowles, AIDS Another Opinion. Dr. Peter Duesberg, Inventing the AIDS Virus. John Crudsen's Science Fictions. Christine Majori's What If Everything You Thought You Knew About AIDS Was Wrong. Or even my own 2 books, AIDS Exposed, and my latest book on the subject, AIDS, The Establishment Confesses It's a Hoax.
Okay, well, so now let's go to the next level. What is the reason for this hoax? I can understand population control. I can understand the greed behind the pharmaceutical industry. What are your particular points of view?
Those 2 are very important reasons. And did you want to keep the caller on, or because I know there's a second caller trying to get through here?
Did you have any final comments at all?
Well, I just wanted to offer one more reference. Have you ever heard of Laila Africa?
No. Could you expand upon that, please?
Yeah, he's written a couple of works in particular on nutrition, and his latest work is called Nutricide. He's an African-centered scholar, specializes in health. But I like the way he breaks down this whole HIV/AIDS thing. Now, the first thing I'd like to say is, a lot of times people talk about this whole HIV/AIDS issue and really don't even know the basic terms, such as virus. People don't know what a virus is. So I'll just, I won't read the whole thing, but I'll just give a reference. If you get his book called Nutricide, I think it's starting on page 101, he talks about how a virus is basically a dead cell particle. So there's no way that it could cause all of the issues that it's purported to have caused, such as these different, AIDS-related diseases and syndromes. So, again, the name of the book is Nutricide, and it starts on page 101, and he goes into depth talking about how basically this whole this notion that viruses cause diseases is nothing more than really a Caucasian medical superstition.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay. All right, you guys have a good day.
Thank you very much.
And we have a second caller. What's it kind
of? Is there anybody there? Hello, caller. Where are you calling from, and what is your name?
Hey, this is Albuquerque. How you doing, guys?
Pretty good. Could you repeat that once more?
Yeah, this is Jake from Albuquerque.
Oh, thank you. How you doing, Jake?
Hey, doing pretty good. Yeah, I was just listening to the conversation, and, Michael, I got to admit I feel for you, because I was in the same boat as yourself. When I first heard about this, HIV/AIDS link through Kitty, I was kind of shocked myself. I was like, no way. This can't be true. But I did a little bit of the research, and it does check out. I would recommend checking out an article by Dr. Rebecca Colshaw called "Why I Quit HIV."
Oh, that's one of the best articles. And I didn't say greetings, you brother Jake. How you doing, man?
Hey, Kitty, what's up, brother?
Man, I'm just a happy little African over here, and I know you're doing good over in the big Q, Albuquerque. But Rebecca Colshaw, we've had her on as a guest, and her article really was explosive because she was an insider. She is a medical mathematician, what's called an epidemiological mathematician, and she has been involved in many of the top epidemical analyses of this whole thing. And she was disgusted at the way that the people were fudging the numbers and just outright fraud, etc. We had an interview with Rebecca Colshaw, and I'll send that with you, Michael. It was an excellent interview. And so we've seen a number of insiders. We've seen one of my dear friends was involved in the AZT, they call them Tier 2 trials, or where they're actually starting to use these AZT trials. And she was required to keep the statistical data, and she saw them fudging the numbers and everything, and they basically rammed the AZT through to being used in the major population, despite the fact that the man who developed AZT, Dr. Richard Belts, said about his own development, which he shelved after its mice studies. He says AZT was shelved for two reasons. First, my studies showed it caused cancer at any dose, and secondly, it was too toxic for even short-term use. And so, we have these insiders, and Rebecca Colshaw, I agree with you, is an awesome voice, makes it very, very clear of why we should not believe what the AIDS establishment has been producing.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And, the great thing about that particular article is that it condenses a lot of the salient points into a short and concise essay that you can read in about 10 minutes. And it really does nail down, I think, a lot of the flaws in the HIV/AIDS hypothesis you really owe it to yourself to just check this information out there, Michael.
All right. Well, I appreciate the phone call, Jake.
Anytime, bro.
Do you have any further comments?
You guys are doing a great job. I guess I'll have to listen to the rest of the show off the air.
Okay. Thank you very much for calling.
You guys have a good one.
You too. Thank you.
All right. And I'm going to print out that Rebecca Colshaw article for you. And maybe we can pull from it. I think we got another caller.
Oh, yeah. Hey. Hi. How are you? Where are you calling from, and what's your name?
Greetings. This is Brother T.A. Elamine from Grand Rapids, Michigan, also known as Abu Simbel.
Okay.
Young brother, please listen to the wisdom of the sages. When a person tells you over and over they've done the research, and you come with some of the statements that I was hearing, I'm thinking, I thought it was a joke in that you were putting out these, you cutting them off before you could finish a point. And I'm saying, is this for real? This man has done hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of hours of research. So the stuff that you're reading in the newspaper, can you accept that could be junk?
Oh, I accept it wholeheartedly. The point is, what I wanted to do, the thing is that there's a larger audience besides LIB Radio who will be hearing this information for probably the first time. I've known Keeney for over, 10 years. So, there are some things that I definitely haven't done the length of research that Keating has done, and I definitely don't know the depth of information that he knows. But at the same time, the ideas or the point of view is not far-fetched whatsoever. I just want to have a conversation where I can get him to overlay the information where people who may not be used to this point of view can at least be open to the idea. And there's a hoax, there's a misleading of information. So what do we do at this point with our people in order to change the tide? And the only way we can change the tide is that we have to give the proper information. And sometimes the proper information might need to have doses apple juice with their medicine. That's just the point of view that I think.
No, I don't know. Some things have to be put out there exactly as they are, straight, no chaser, because if you water certain things down, you get pablum, and it doesn't mix well. What I'm getting at is, after he makes a point, don't come back with an objection unless you have a valid, okay, I've read this, that, I've read the other, this is what such and such says, but speculation sometimes is not always good if there are no facts to back it up.
Well, thank you very much.
And I've done research on this for a long, long time, too, and find that Kidi Obiawadu is a leading-edge researcher. And just pick up one of his pamphlets, and you'll have the questions that you can answer for all those doubting Thomases and Thomasinas out there. You can give them this information as opposed to challenging, so to speak, what he's saying. Lay out your premise if you have a different set of facts. But don't stop him in the middle of every point. Well, no, what about this and what about that? Let him lay it out, and then challenge based on information. I've been listening to you and the Mind, Booty, and Soul. This is you, right?
Correct.
For a while, and first time I've called, although sometimes I thought the topics were, I haven't found the words. But some things you've been putting out there is, this is how our people see it, this is how most people see it, and we can't use those terms unless we've talked to most. We don't speculate like the politicians, survey said. So there's a small group of people this and a small group of people that and a large group and a large group. But don't wrap it up. It sounds to me like you're doubting everything you say. But I'm hearing you, what you're saying, you're not. But it sure appears that way to me. So.
Well, I guess what I'm trying to do is that.
And I'll keep tuning in, and I hope other people tune in.
Well, feel free to give us an email at info@mindbootyandsoul.tv, and I'd like to hear all your suggestions and point of views, especially for some future topics.
Okay, will do.
Thank you very much.
Greetings, you Baba T.A. Hotel. And I appreciate his kind words of support and embrace. And, you have
a lot of warm listeners out there.
This is LIB Radio. It's a big family, man.
I know it's a big family. But the thing, Kidi, if we have all this information, misinformation,
right,
that's leading our people into, population control.
One of about 5 different justifications for this.
Okay, well, let's lay the 5 different justifications from your point of view.
Well, for the perspective of African people, the whites who foisted this on the world, the Chinese did not foist this on the world, Indians did not foist this on the world, Arabs did not foist it. This was foisted on the world by whites, let's be real clear.
Okay.
They have targeted high-growing populations and other people's populations as a threat to their hegemony. And so, therefore, they have implemented a whole spectrum of fertility reduction schemes. This is considered to be one of their state-of-the-art schemes, except for this one doesn't work very well either. The only populations where we can see that this scheme is working, it's working efficiently for them, is within African Americans as well as South Africans. Those are the only 2 populations that are voluntarily restricting their own fertility as a consequence of these population control schemes. The others, they're just not having any.
So there's no other population decrease in other, continents of the world that are, mostly people of color?
Mexico had a very, very steep population fertility decrease. Not a population decrease, but a fertility decrease. Mexico was one of the most dramatic declines, and that's why you can see the Mexican leadership kind of being invited into that, okay, you're North Americans now circle, because there was a great fear that the brown people of Mexico would overpopulate the U.S. population. Of course, they've kind of gotten over that, realizing they can't stop it, so they're guiding in a certain way. So we have seen fertility reduction schemes rather successful with certain populations around the planet. But their schemes for Southeast Asia were pretty much ineffective. Their schemes for Africa have been very ineffective, except for South Africa.
Now, what are the other reasons for
this scheme? One was just like in 1976, under the Carter regime, there was a serious consideration of reducing CDC funding. They thought the CDC was an over-bloated agency, and anytime you have an agency with too much funding, they're always then out trying to find ways to justify their existence. Now, in 1976 was when they came up with the whole swine flu scare. You might have been a little young, but I remember that distinctively. When a small cluster of GIs at I think it was Fort Knox or somewhere in Kentucky, came up with a flu, they came out with, oh, this is the 1918 swine flu all over again. They came up with a scheme to vaccinate 213 million Americans and stopped the vaccination program after 45 million injections had been done, because so many people were dying, so many people were becoming paralyzed with Guillain-Barré syndrome, and also the various manufacturers that were manufacturing their vaccine were just like really screwing it up. Some manufacturers just manufacturing just garbage and giving it to government to inject into people. So in 1976, when the CDC funding was threatened, they came up with the swine flu scare. Well, people forget that Ronald Reagan was also threatening to cut the CDC budget in the early 1980s. Between 1980, when Reagan is elected in 1984, that was when we saw the evolution of what was called GRID, or gay-related immunodeficiency, become AIDS in 1984, when Margaret J. Heckler and this fraudulent doctor, the U.S. discoverer Robert Gallo, rushed to the podium and said, "We have found the probable cause of AIDS, and it is my virus." And so when Reagan threatened to cut the CDC budget, that was when a secretive group inside the CDC called the Epidemic Intelligence Service, the EIS, it was a group of who came up with the notion that this largely environmentally imposed condition, which became GRID, was in actuality an infectious disease, and that the country needed the CDC to be strong to protect the country from a national epidemic.
And so the other two reasons?
Another two reasons, pharmaceutical companies have found this to be an incredible way to make an awful lot of money on garbage, on two whole new classes of drugs have come into play as a consequence of this. Both of them have been disasters on the human body. The first class are called the nucleoside analogs, AZT, DDI, DDC, D4T, 3TC, etc. All this whole classification of nucleoside analogs. And if you understand language, nucleoside. Side means kill, homicide, suicide, fratricide, genocide. Nucleus is the cell. So anything that's designed to kill the nucleus of a cell, you have to wonder, well, how can this help people with the compromised immune systems? And that's why the people die of disease related to bone marrow depletion, killing off their white blood cells, et cetera, et cetera. And the other class of diseases are called protease inhibitors. And unfortunately, the protease is necessary for the body to grow and the cells to develop, et cetera. So by giving people inhibitors of protease, they're in actuality giving them drugs to kill the people.
And last but not least.
And the last but not least reason, this is the retrovirologists and these advanced biological scientists looking for a means to justify their scientific supremacy. And the classic case of this is the U.S. discoverer of HIV or AIDS, or HTLV3 as he called it, Robert J. Gallo. There's an excellent book out I recommend to anyone who wants to understand why 3 congressional hearings called Gallo's research into the discovery of HIV fraud, cover-up, and government malfeasance, as well as his laboratory malfeasance. And he was ridiculed, but later they rescued his reputation, and now he's considered to be a leading science. But John Crewdson's book called Scientific Fictions, or Science Fictions, exposes the horrible record of Robert J. Gallo and these congressional hearings, the John Dingell subcommittee hearings that exposed Gallo's research as fraud. And he's the discoverer of AIDS in the United States and holds part of the patent for the ELISA immunobinding enzyme-linked HIV antibody assay test.
Okay. So now, with all this, hysteria, fraud, a group of people getting together, keep saying the same thing over and over again, it becomes reality. How do you demystify and get the facts out to the growing population?
Good question. First of all, the first thing I do whenever I'm involved with a debate, and I've had debate with major scientists, including world-renowned AIDS researchers, destroy them because I know the weaknesses of their argument. The first great weakness is why, after 20 years of the most expensive funded epidemic or infectious disease research in the world, why is there no test for HIV? Why, after the FDA
is
approved...
There is a test, right?
Well, I know the FDA has approved 31 different immunobinding assays. Which of them is a test for HIV? I didn't know that there was a test for HIV. I thought there was none. So apparently you know something that I don't know.
Well, I mean, what is everybody going down there and getting a positive or negative reading about?
Well, let me go to my website, 7mac.com. Where yeah.
I just want to know what.
Let me ask you this.
When I had a former girlfriend about 10 years ago, she said, let's go get a HIV test together.
And you did?
Yeah, anonymously.
And the first question you did when you went down there was the following. This is the first question you asked of them before they administered the test. I know this was the first question you asked. Before I take this test, you might have used Ebonics. Before I take this test, I want to read the package insert that came with the test. I want to read that before you administer the test. You did that first, right?
Of course I didn't.
You had to. Why would they put the package insert in?
I had an oral test.
Okay. So you didn't read the package insert, so you don't know what the manufacturer said about their own test before you took the test, right? Well, can I read to you some of what the manufacturers say on that document that you didn't read? That's in the test kit. It's in it.
Please, help me
because
out.
They're required by law to put that in there. Should you run out and get tested for HIV, you better read this excerpt first. Is the HIV test valid? The test kit manufacturer's own literature admits, quote, ELISA testing alone cannot be used to diagnose AIDS, even if the recommended investigation of reactive specimens suggests a high probability that the antibody to HIV-1 is present. That from Abbott Laboratories. The insert for the Western blot warns, quote, do not use this kit as the sole basis of diagnosis of HIV-1 infection. Now, this is all taken from a much larger document, which says things such as at present there is no known method for determining the presence of or absence of HIV antibodies. In essence, the HIV test kit insert tells you there is no test for HIV. They have to tell you that. Otherwise, you'd sue them. And a lot of people are suing them. There's a huge number of suits. I know people who are also suing these test kit manufacturers for false positive diagnosis. Kim Bannon, we've had her on several times, and she's one of the most notorious. A white woman, when she got her HIV positive diagnosis, they called her back in, and 2 black women were in the clinic, and she was using a public clinic. And she, because she was having a little hard times at the time, she came in, a nice, attractive-looking, suburban-looking white woman, and the 2 black women looked at each other and said, what are we going to say to her? The first question they asked her is, have you been pregnant recently?
And
she said, no, I hadn't been pregnant. They went down this whole list of what would trigger false positives. Finally, they said, well, you got HIV. The 2 black women who were running the clinic could not believe that this suburban white woman presenting to them was actually HIV infected. And I know we're short on time, but this is why you guys got to have 2 hours. But let me give you a quote, Michael, from the AIDS establishment itself that shows. Actually, I have 2 quotes from 2 different documents. They must be put together for you to realize that the white woman in America is exempt from HIV diagnosis. She's exempt. And if I hadn't gone down to the Centers for Disease Control, down to Emory University in Atlanta, and read through a 40-page document and seen this on page 22, most of us wouldn't know. So I'm going to give you 2 quotes. Can I read these 2?
Please.
The first document, and I have them cited, referenced in the back of the book, so I'm not going to skip forward. Just trust me, the reference is here. Even with the accuracy of an enzyme immunoassay, EIA, a large number of false positive results can be expected. Assuming a specificity of 99.5% and an HIV prevalence among users of 1%, the positive predictive value of a home screening test would be 67%. 33 of 100 positive tests would be false positives. With a lower prevalence of 0.1%, the predictive value drops to 17%, and 83 of 100 positive tests would be false positives. However, as the prevalence falls, a larger proportion of users will be uninfected. With a 0.1% prevalence, 99.9% of tests should yield negative results, but they don't yield negative results. Now, here's the second quote from a different article about the white woman. Whether the tests will perform as well in the United States as they have abroad is unknown. And you know where they were using them abroad. For one thing, using a single rapid test in a low prevalence population will give a lower positive predictive value, PPV. Suppose, for example, a single rapid test that has a 99.4% specificity is administered to 1,000 people, meaning 6 will test false positive. That error rate won't matter much in areas with a high prevalence of HIV because in all probability, the people testing false positive will have the disease. But if that same test were performed on 1,000 white, affluent suburban housewives, a low prevalence population, in all likelihood, all positive results will be false, and positive predictive values plummet to 0.
So what is that telling me?
The test is worthless. It's worthless. It's not the test. It's the post-test counseling session which decides whether you have HIV or a false positive.
Okay, you know what you're sounding like to me now, right now?
Like a man who reads extensively, right? A brother with an attitude.
You sound like these SAT tests.
Well, didn't someone once say if you want to hide something from a black man, you put it in a book?
It just sounds like, and I'm sorry, you loyal LIB radio listeners, I just have to ask this question, because, again, a wide percentage of our population is like, hey, I'm reading this, I'm hearing this, and it's probably bouncing off their head because there's so much of the other type of propaganda they've been receiving for, as you say, over 20 years. And we have over 20 years of information in our heads.
And they have not been prepared to hear what we're talking about tonight.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so,
that's right.
automatically, just for fear that the fact that you could be right, some people might just turn you off because they can't bear to listen to the fact that this could be truthful, no matter if it resonates in their heart or not.
I can assure you, if you drive past McDonald's or Burger King or Murder King as it's called, if you drive past junk food, garbage food, the Chitlin bucket outlet, if you drive past those things that people indulge in, a liquor store or whatever, and you stand outside, you will probably find a large number of people supporting those businesses, despite the fact that a huge amount of information has come out to show you how using those products will harm your long-term self-interest.
Of course, yeah.
So we're living in a culture where 6 is and 9, where up is down, where good is bad and bad is good, where denigration is looked upon as cool, and academic pursuit, like I've just done, is looked upon as unpalatable, undesirable.
Oh, you're weird. You're outcast.
Yeah.
You're not, as a black man, you're not a man.
Yeah. Well, I have been able to translate this down into language where I can relate to the common person. But there are certain times when the language has to be so incredibly precise, such as when you're on a public record like this, in a public forum, a public statement. But here's the simplest way I can put it. This comes from a brilliant young man from Sierra Leone, a former child soldier. When he was being interviewed on KPFK, local, Pacifica network, they asked him about AIDS in his country, and he laughed. And he said, AIDS, we call it American invention to discourage sex. And I said, out of the mouths of the youth comes the most profound, simple truth that we should really appreciate. And so to that young man, the former child soldier, I looked at these youth as the real leadership, an American invention to discourage sex. The same sex that brought you and I into this world is unprotected sex. Now they tell us it will kill us. Our grandmother said it would cause babies. We have a choice to believe in our grandmother's wisdom or the wisdom of the American medical, pharmaceutical, national security establishment.
No, I feel you. To kind of conclude some of the things, if you just take a look at Demolition Man with Wesley Snipes, made in 1993, there's a couple of profound things that you can look in movies. Like if you look at Enemy of the State, and I know I'm getting off base just a little bit. Look at Enemy of the State. The birth date of the villain in Enemy of the State. You know what his birthday was?
I don't recall.
9/11. Enemy of the State is an exact film basically about the Patriots Act.
That's true.
That happened before the Patriots Act. Very interesting. That's now, right. If you take a look at Demolition Man, they talk about Arnold Schwarzenegger becoming president. and that they actually created a new law that allowed foreigners to become president. That's in Demolition Man.
It's scary, huh?
Oh, yeah. You got to look at movies. You know, they give you the truth sometimes.
I don't look at movies.
Okay,
you know.
well, you know, and finally, so the point that I was getting in Demolition Man is that bodily,
the exchange of bodily fluids
is considered bad in that particular society.
Isn't that a Western society? Isn't that a Western vision of the future?
Yeah, it definitely is.
In Africa, you know, they still value families with large children. In the African village, a woman who gives birth to a large number of healthy children is looked upon as a queen, as a shero, as a hero, as someone to be celebrated. In the United States, if a black woman gives birth to 3 or more children, they look at her like, what's wrong with you? Are you crazy?
Well, I mean, when we hear this information about black women contracting AIDS, new cases of AIDS, and you're telling me it's a hoax, what is that really saying about black women? Or what are they really trying to project about black women?
That they're vulnerable, and that black men have fallen off of their sacred duty to protect, defend, upload, and uplift the women. I'm very proud of the fact that I've gone to AIDS conferences before, and I can recall one specific one that happened downtown Los Angeles. And as I walked in the conference, all by myself, first thing I saw 2 white women pointing at me and basically acknowledging there he is. And obviously they had seen me before out there fighting against this. And so it was really interesting that, you know, I was being acknowledged for my work, you know. But and there was good reason for them to be concerned. Within 10 minutes, I was standing outside of the conference halls in the lobby of the hotel, because you got to be careful. I've been let out of handcuffs of these conferences before. But I was standing outside in the lobby, surrounded by about 8 or 10 black women, most of all of whom had a big yellow bag in their hand, stuffed with teddy bears and vitamins and drugs, and the name of these pharmaceutical chemicals on the outside of the bag. And it's a goodie bag, which was basically give them gifts and then steal their life at $10,000 a year for these meds. And I was surrounded by about 8 or 10 of these women, and I had a talk with them, and I said, you know, you are here based upon a false premise. You were convinced that this antibody assay, this test that you took, was a real diagnostic method. I'm here to give you the most wonderful, hopeful message that you've heard in a long time. You are not going to die of AIDS. If there is anything wrong with you, we'll go specifically to what that is. Most of you were engaging in behaviors that left yourself vulnerable. Some of you just got tricked into taking a phony test. And these women, every time I've done this, I've had black women come up to me after I've debated a major doctor and just surround me and just one by one just take their time wrapping their arms around me saying, thank you, brother. And I think that maybe that's the greater message that we want to convey, is that the black man needs to stand up. He needs to pull up his pants, put away the liquor, the alcohol, the reefer. He needs to sober up, turn the television off, hit these books, and learn what he needs to learn so he can do a much better job of uplifting, protecting, and defending the women and children of his village. The main reason I'm in this fight at this level, sacrificing all, even them breaking into my hotel rooms to steal my data, is because black womanhood needs championship warriors.
That's very well said.
Yeah, and that's why I'm in this fight. And that's why I'm so down on the black queers who are one of the big recipients of this gravy train money to promote this lie. Because there's nothing, you can't convince me that black queer men can defend black women.
Not at all. But to see beyond that point, you know, you have all this information, have all this knowledge, you know, it's in your head. And it's in your LIB listener's head.
Yeah, it's been diffused very efficiently.
Yeah, and as we can tell from the phone conversations, you know, they hear your point of view without a doubt, and they've listened to you over and over again. And so now they've digested your information. We have to get that information on a larger population.
You know, I gave it to Congresswoman Maxine Waters.
Okay, but she doesn't serve our interests. So that's
well, she made an interesting statement. She asked me, what am I supposed to do with this stuff? And I said, well, a lot of people read it. And she offered me access to a grant, about $60,000. I said, well, you know, Justice Department offered me twice that, and I turned them down.
So my suggestion, or just an idea, let's take some cases, get a video camera, find out and take some doctors who really are dedicated to finding out what's wrong with that individual, And let's go on it one by one.
But, you know, that's been done so many times. Robin Scoville did it. Gary Null, one of the leading health researchers in the world, did it very efficiently. And I have the DVD probably sitting right there on the shelf. Right,
I don't see it on your LIB storefront.
It's in our catalog, yeah. These
Is
are
it?
in our catalogs, yeah.
I guess you got so much. I missed that
I
one.
have over 115 hours of this information on AIDS, which I'll add this program to it also. I have over 115 hours of this that I've accumulated. I don't know of any other interviewer in the world who has a bigger collection of one-on-one AIDS interviews than I've collected. Leading scientist, Dr. David Rasnick, an inventor and a piece of protease inhibitors, molecular biologist, Harvey Bialy is a good friend of mine. I've had him on a number of times. Documentaries. You know, Tony Brown's Journal did 12 programs exposing the HIV/AIDS hoax. He had Gary Null and Arthur Ashe on also. Arthur Ashe asked how he was doing on the AZT. He said, these drugs they're working wonderful for me. I really feel an improvement. And he was dead 60 days or so later, dead from AZT poisoning. You know, Arthur Ashe was a good man. We lost a lot of good people behind this fraud, this hoax, this lie. So you and I, we do our part to disseminate truths. And then those who receive the truth, they disseminate it. But we really need the power of a major media outlet to even challenge these people. See, they don't want me on the other media outlets. I've been on many of them. And as quickly as they can, they run me off. Believe it or not, Larry Elders, KABC, this anti-black Larry Elders, he kept me on his program for over 20 minutes while I decimated Dr. Jeffrey Galpin of the Shared Medical Research Foundation, a quote-unquote major AIDS researcher in the world. I decimated the guy right there. And Larry Elders, because he's kind of anti-government, he let me do it. Took his guest apart to the point he told me finally, okay, well, my guest is not speaking any longer, so is there anything you want to close your comment?
I would love to see that.
Unfortunately, I didn't even imagine I'd be on that long, and I didn't record that. So I later asked KABC for the air check, and they said, we're not giving up air checks because they think people want air checks just to sue them. So that one is just a story. But this is the same Jeffrey Galpin who cited in the LA Times, and I know we're doing overtime, so this is on me, right? But Jeffrey Galpin citing a new miracle AIDS drug for low-cost AIDS treatment.
Yeah, I've read that too.
Yeah, this is how I believe my book. You see that? The low-cost AIDS treatment, the miracle drug.
Mm-hmm.
I begin my book, AIDS, the Establishment Confesses, with that. What's that drug called, Michael? Okay, you might take your time. It's called hydroxyurea. Do you recall that term?
No, I don't.
Yeah. It says researchers in L.A. and Washington have identified what may be the first inexpensive AIDS drug, a finding that could have major importance for the 50% of HIV-positive Americans not receiving treatment because of its cost. Now, who are they talking about?
African people.
They're talking about African Americans, poor people, right?
Mm-hmm.
They said the drug is unique that it affects host cells. Because it has been around so long, no pharmaceutical company has exclusive rights to hydroxyurea. As a result, money for clinical trials has come from private donors. And they cite Jeffrey Galpin in the article. He said he's been using this. They said they also use this drug on sickle cell patients. Who's that?
Black people.
Now, hydroxyurea. My daddy was a chemist. I learned long ago, take these long, complex words and break them down into syllables. Hydroxyurea. So we see the first two words, hydrogen and oxygen. We combine hydrogen and oxygen. That is called?
Almost water, right?
That is water. H2O is water. Hydroxyurea. Urea. That's the root word of ureic acid. Also the root word of urine. Hydroxyurea is dehydrated piss.
And that's our old grandma's remedy back in the early 1900s.
And now they're providing it for people who can't afford the main AIDS drugs. And so I begin my book off with a riotous laugh. That these people have got us so tricked that they will sell us dehydrated piss to treat our immune deficiencies.
We can use our own piss. Well, that's capitalism at its best.
Yeah, that's also called genocide.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm. It's called genocide. I, when it comes down to these people in the establishment, I name as many of their names as I can. I name Harry Haverskos. I name Robert Gallo. I name Don Francis. I name a number of them, especially in my book AIDS Exposed. I name their names and provoke them. Call me. Sue me. Get me in a court of law. Ask me to prove what I'm saying. I name their names because if we don't name their names, if we just talk about the white man, this or that, then this generalized response is not going to be effective at all. They can be isolated, and we have to isolate them. I name names of these people coming into our community, experimenting on, looking to find black women in the housing projects to inject with experimental HIV vaccines. And let me name this guy's name because he's still operating here in L.A. County. His name is Dr. Peter Kernt, K-E-R-N-D-T. In a manner reminiscent of the infamous Tuskegee experiment, L.A. County Department of Health epidemiologist Dr. Peter Kernt has been quietly conducting AIDS studies in poor minority neighborhoods. And I found him conducting 6 different studies. I can't say what I would do. All I can say is these people have committed egregious genocidal behaviors against us. Once they're identified, the political leadership must step in at a certain point. Supervisor Yvonne Burke complained about this guy's activities, but she shut down her whole dialogue on this 2 weeks later.
Wonder why?
I suspect why. I sent her a huge package of information talking about what these people were really doing, and she never responded. I actually know someone who's in her office. I know him very, very well, but they just wouldn't touch this one. This one was too big.
Mm-hmm. Well, they have their own, political interests.
Yeah, and they can be destroyed also by when you take on certain fights. I've seen memos from Kaiser Permanente with my name in it talking about silence this rabble-rouser, and they spent $250,000 in L.A. County to silence me.
Wow, you could use that money.
Well, the KJLH could have used it also. Ooh, I didn't mean to say that. I didn't say the LA Sentinel neither, did I? Or the Wave. No, I'm not going to say who took the money. Healthy beginnings for black babies. I'm not going to say who took the money.
Well, I think we're going to come to a conclusion here. This has been a very, very interesting topic here. Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Keaty. The reason why I asked you on this show, because I knew you were an expert in this area, and I was trying to get a conversation which we can just introduce the idea to a novice. Because, I look at our particular government, I look at the whole world powers, and there's a lot of things that I look in detail and I do not believe. Mm-hmm. So this is just one of many different concepts, different ideas, different interpretation, different propagandas that have been committed against our people, but we still need to get to the root of why we're hearing this and what we can do to get around it, what we can do to move forward, and actually, as you said, have permitted sex.
Yeah. You got a couple of emails in as a caller. Can we take these before we close out?
Sure.
All right.
Hi, how are you doing? Where are you calling from, and what is your name?
This is Corey calling from McCabe Town.
Hey, how you doing, Corey?
How you doing?
I'm great.
This is a good conversation you're having, but a lot of a big problem with human beings on this planet is the refusal to think independently of others and to do thorough research and not believe what any one person says. And I just read about 2 or 3 sentences for you. All truth goes through 3 stages. First, it is ridiculed. Then it is violently opposed. Finally, it is accepted as self-evident. And people in this country supposedly believe in the Bible. They claim that very Bible tells them, their own God tells them to test out their own God and see if he's telling the truth, to prove if it's really true. And if you can test out God, therefore you must test out everything you encounter to see if it's actually true. And because of the population of black people in this country, we do not study science, and nor do we investigate when people put this information out. Now, I'm a student, and I go to Langston University here,
and I have one of these so-called queer Afrocentric professors. And actually, my wife is in his class right now. Now, they're going to have a little kind of back-and-forth debate coming up this Thursday about AIDS in the black community. So with Keely coming on and with you coming on, and this discussion is very timely. And so I just like to add that to the conversation.
I tell you, one of the things that really, the reason why I want to have this discussion, because I get this email from, I can't remember, I always get rid of them and put them in, delete them. But I think it's like African American AIDS or something like that. I can't.
Minority AIDS Project. There's a whole bunch of these gravy train organizations.
Oh man, and I just, the rhetoric that I read on those particular newsletters is just like, I mean, it's just like I keep hearing the same information over and over again, and that's what frustrates me about the individual who actually is receiving this information, is I'm not getting anything new. I'm not getting anything. It's like I'm hearing the same thing for 20 years. Like, haven't we gone beyond this step? Are we still dealing with this particular, we're still trying to conclude, is HIV related to AIDS and all these things, and it just really, it just pisses me off.
Well, one major thing is just the study of the word virus itself will produce numerous questions and cause an individual to question a lot of things from medical science. If you begin to research the word virus.
Yeah, let me ask you one question, Michael, on that. Just I don't mean to be putting you on, because I get asked this question of 99 of 100 doctors, and 90 or more of them will miss it. What is a virus?
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, he was real straightforward.
I claim no medical or scientific background.
Yeah. Is a virus living?
Well, according to what I just heard with you, no.
Okay.
It's a dead cell.
Yeah, a virus is actually, the technical definition of a virus that you could use is a simple strands of protein covered by a double lipid protein sheath, or simple strands of DNA, simple strands of DNA covered by a double lipid protein sheath. If we understand, simple strands of DNA cannot be a living entity. So viruses are not living. So they can't think, jump, react, respond, hide and seek. They can't do none of that stuff that's purported. You can't kill something that's never been living.
Makes sense to me. But, I mean, I guess we're all motivated by those 5 factors that you mentioned earlier to continue
the system's motivated.
to continue the hoax. And then there's people who may have like honest perspective to see something different, where they go along with the program because it's financially beneficial to them.
That's very sad, but it's so true.
And then so you have another group of people who maybe think different and think outside the box, so to speak, and have a different point of view, and what they get quieted. No one, you know.
The AIDS establishment has a huge amount of money coming in from the top. But it's critically necessary that they must have the base of the pyramid must be real wide, which is why as the money disseminates down, they create these grassroots organizations and activists, etc. Your church can get money to join the AIDS establishment. They call faith-based initiatives and a number of others. That's one of the reasons why a huge number of black women are recruited, because they're recruiting them through the churches. And where do you find black women? Where's a place where you can consistently find black women?
The beauty shop, the market, and church. And colleges.
And they're not, they do a lot of recruiting on colleges, but college students, they don't really think about the health issues many times. Many, especially amongst college students, their sexual activities have been so restricted in their life that they actually fall outside of AIDS, HIV risk categories. Now, college, I know you're frowning, right?
No, okay. I'm like, what college and period was this?
Okay, here's what you're going to have to understand. The risk of heterosexual transmission of HIV is very, very low. And you're talking about the case of syphilis or gonorrhea.
Of course, according to you, it's non-existent.
According to the establishment, it's very, very low, almost non-existent. If you're talking about STDs like syphilis and gonorrhea, the risk of transmission in a heterosexual contact is 1 of 3 at the highest. When the case of HIV transmission between what's called discordant couples, where one is HIV positive and the other is negative, the risk of transmission from male to female is 1 in 1,000. The risk of transmission from female to male is 1 in like 7,000 or 8,000.
Wow.
So that's not an infectious STD. That is, I mean, 1 out of 8,000, it's something, anything else could be happening to make the woman's immune system collapse in the case of 1 out of 8,000 people. So when you're talking about college students, if you're talking about women being at risk, how many of those women in college have had 1,000 acts of unprotected sex with someone who was HIV positive?
None.
Right, let alone random. We're talking about random HIV positivity versus someone who's definitely tested antibody positive. So statistically, it's a non-disease. I mean, if you're talking about random acts of, you have 1 act of unprotected sex with a total stranger in the American population, is like 1 out of 3 trillion possible, 1 out of 3 billion possibility that you could become HIV infected. And a lot of these women, black women, who have been targeted as HIV positive, some of them haven't had sex for years, Michael.
Corey, did you have any final comments and questions?
Well, yes, so to some extent. My wife is actually pregnant, and she went down. She's having a midwife deliver the baby. But the hospital, now the CDC is trying to require all black people to be tested for AIDS, especially black women. And they were trying to require her to be tested for, with the HIV test.
And has she had any other children already?
Oh, yes, we have 6 children total.
She would then be the greatest likelihood to test false positive, because one of the 60 to 100 conditions in the United States acknowledged as a false positive indicator is what is called multiparous pregnancy. That the HLA antibodies, which are created during pregnancy, tend to build up the more children a woman has, and that the HLA antibodies, the proteins, will cross-react on these antibody assays. So if a woman has had 2 or more children, it's called a multiparous pregnancy, and that is a significant increase in a false positive testing risk.
That's interesting.
And so, what were you going to? Did you have a conclusion, or did you have a point to your wife being tested?
No, well, I was just putting that information in, how they're very aggressive with the testing, and since the CDC has instituted that, and I'll have to let her call in and tell her story on that one. But I'll just hang up and listen.
All right, great hearing from you, Brother
Thank you, Corey.
Thanks.
Have a wonderful evening.
All right. Before we go, can we just snap a couple emails here?
Please.
Too. Brother Jake, writing from Albuquerque, Keedy. Though you rightly claim that, quote, whites have foisted the HIV hoax on the world, you should, in all fairness, note the contribution of whites, like Duesberg, Mullis, etc., in exposing the hoax. And also note the complicity of many blacks in this scam. Those certain powerful elites, would like to see us divided. Fighting the AIDS hoax should not be a black-white thing. I wish more white people would listen to LIB, but this divide is a real mother. That from Jake.
Was that the Jake that called earlier?
Yeah, that was Jake who called earlier. And, Jake makes a good point. And I have interviewed a number of very powerful white people who have done an immense job, trooper job in exposing this. So he's very well in that. But he makes a point about blacks involved in the scam. The blacks are involved in the scam on the down line of it. There are no blacks. Well, no. There are blacks up in the higher. There was the former Surgeon General, Jocelyn Elders, and there was also, what's her name over at the CDC? She was head of I can't remember her name right now because Harvey and I talk about her. Harvey knows her and he flirts with her, but she's a genocidal maniac. So I do agree with you that there are blacks who I have called genocidal maniacs because of their participation in this. Way beyond when they knew the truth, they still stayed in this. Harara over at UCLA, her first name escapes me right now. I've challenged her to come out from behind the shadows of UCLA and debate this in public. There have been other people in LA County Department of Health, black women, who I've challenged, come out from behind her ivory tower and debate this in public, and they refuse to do so. So, Jake, your points are very well made, and they are accurate.
Was there another email?
Another email comes to us from the People's Republic of China.
Wow. Well, speaking about the People's Republic of China now, according to what I've read, And, you know, what I can read and what I listen to the news is correct, right?
Mm-hmm. What do they say about China? They all dying off?
No, there's between 600,000 and 1 million AIDS victims this year. And AIDS will cost China between 460 billion to 770 billion yen annually. Yen annually.
Mm-hmm. Yuan. That's their Chinese currency.
Okay.
Well, you know, that's according to the U.S. Western media. If you went to the Chinese media, they would probably say something completely different. That they would basically say what I have them saying, that AIDS is a disease of the West.
But, I mean, isn't everything that I read in the paper, I mean, again...
It's in the paper. It was on TV. It had to be true.
That powerful picture I saw today in the L.A. Times.
Yeah,
you know.
Let's go. You've been to Africa before.
Yes, I have.
Yeah. Do you see that baby dying off, the one in the dust with the vulture behind him, the one with the distended belly and the little pencil-thin arms and legs? I know you saw that baby.
No, but I saw other things.
Yeah. Africa has its challenges, no doubt.
Yeah.
Clean water, sanitation, roads, electrification, and rural place clinics are all critical problems. Malnutrition, protein deficiencies, waterborne parasitic diseases, the consequences of war and destruction. Those are all major problems which cause disease deaths. Once these problems are resolved, the disease deaths go down very tremendously.
So what was the email from...
our brother Dushimimana writes to us from PRC. Mambo, Vipa, VP, Brother Keita and Michael. I think I understand, Brother Michael. The AIDS establishment still have a big advantage of vocabulary because of this, quote, virus name. The moment we accept it to be the human immunodeficiency virus, then it has to cause AIDS. HIV would cause AIDS, but the virus is named incorrectly. What I wanted to say is my friend who knows the man who is in charge of the AIDS Commission in Rwanda was going back, and I printed out pages from the following websites, Duesburg.com, AliveandWell.com, 7mac.com, etc. And I also gave him the videos, HIV/AIDS, Facts or Fiction, and the other side of AIDS. I also gave those to my sister and my friends in the Rwandan National University Faculty of Medicine. I really hope that will make an impact on the Rwanda policy on AIDS. Asante Sana. Very important because Rwanda at 1992 had the highest fertility rate in the world. They really came after Rwanda to try and get them to reduce their fertility. They were not buying the whole HIV/AIDS thing. And then in 1994, a significant proportion of the Rwanda population was wiped out in 100 days of madness. I have always contended that that madness was perpetrated by the U.S. national security establishment in context with the national security establishments of France and Belgium.
Mm.
You know, but the Africans killed the other Africans. We have to admit that. You know, Michael, do you want to pick my brain for any more of this?
No, you basically got me here.
Well, let me just ask you: has this opened up your eyes that maybe that you should go back and reassess much of what you've heard, or are you afraid? Do you strap it up before you take Jimmy out for a walk or Johnson out for a walk?
Yeah, I'm not trying to get anybody pregnant.
Yeah. And as a barrier device, there are condoms, especially non-latex condoms, are effective. When it comes to latex condoms, of course, you know, that's a whole nother scam itself. I would never recommend anybody allow a latex condom to be put up inside a woman's womb.
And why is that?
It's just toxic. It's a poison. It's a deadly device. It causes cancer. It causes fallopian tube blockage. Causes severe immune reaction. It compounds other other allergies. Leishmaniasis spores on it. It's a horrible device. It really is.
And there's a lot of education that needs to be done here, Kitty.
That's why we have our own radio station, huh?
Well, on that note, thank you for listening to Mind, Booty, and Soul Radio. We just had another very interesting conversation, demystifying AIDS.
Yeah, can I recommend that people go online to my website to investigate?
Please.
Go to 7MAC, that's the number 7 followed by 3 letters, MAC.com, and it's a chapter there called a folder called Investigations. You can do 7mac.com/investigations. And it's going to open up a whole new world. And there's a lot of citations and references you'll be able to access there.
I look forward to it.
All right.
The audience looks forward to it. Thank you very much.
All right.
And we'll see you guys next week. the beginning of December. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful, wonderful week. Bye-bye.